We're counting down 15 reasons Wyoming is far more influential than you might think. From powering distant cities and anchoring the nation's energy grid to shaping America's food supply, politics, and natural heritage, each entry reveals why this unassuming state holds national sway in ways few realize. Which surprising force will top the list? Let's get started with the state's commanding role as a United States energy engine. Wyoming produces about 12 times more energy than its own residents could ever use. That outsized supply does not just stay within state lines. It keeps homes, factories, and businesses running across the country. The state ranks as the fourth largest net energy supplier in the United States, with an energy mix that has long been dominated by coal but is now rapidly shifting. In 2024, nearly 60% of Wyoming's electricity still comes from coal, a legacy that stretches back decades and fuels distant cities from the Midwest to the Southeast. But the landscape is changing. Wind power now makes up almost a quarter of the state's generation, thanks to strong prairie gusts and wide open land. Wyoming's wind capacity has more than doubled since 2019, reaching around 3,700 megawatts, with even more projects already underway. Natural gas too flows out of Wyoming through interstate pipelines, supplying markets as far as California and the Great Lakes. Even uranium, though less visible, plays a quiet role. It is mined here and shipped to fuel nuclear plants nationwide. All told, Wyoming's energy exports help stabilize national prices and keep the grid supplied, no matter the weather or demand spikes elsewhere. The lights in far-off cities burn brighter because of what happens here, in a state where energy is produced on a scale that dwarfs local needs and ripples far beyond its borders. 12 tons of coal leave the Powder River Basin every second, enough to fill more than 50 trains a day at the region's peak. This corner of northeastern Wyoming holds 7 of the 10 largest coal mines in the United States, with names like North Antelope Rochelle and Black Thunder dominating the landscape. In 2008, miners here pulled a staggering 466 million tons from the earth, supplying nearly 40% of the nation's coal for power plants as far away as Georgia and Michigan. Even today, as the country moves toward renewables, the basin remains a heavyweight. Projections for 2025 still put Wyoming's coal output near 200 million tons, a sharp drop from its heyday, but enough to keep it at the top of the national charts. The scale of these operations shapes more than local economies. When Powder River production rises or falls, electricity costs respond across the grid. Utilities once depended on this low-sulfur coal to keep power affordable and reliable, especially in the Midwest and the Southeast. Each loaded train rolling east from Gillette carries not just fuel, but a piece of the country's energy security. The basin's output once set the pace for dispatch costs nationwide, and its decline now sends ripples through electricity markets, forcing plants to look for alternatives. The story of the Powder River Basin is one of sheer industrial might, its fortunes tied directly to the price and reliability of power in American homes. In 1872, Congress set aside an untamed stretch of wilderness in northwestern Wyoming, creating Yellowstone the world's first national park. Within its boundaries, half of all the active geysers on the planet burst from the earth, driven by a restless volcanic force simmering just beneath the surface. Old Faithful, the park's most famous geyser, erupts around 17 times a day, drawing crowds who time their watches by its steady blasts. But Yellowstone's influence reaches far beyond its thermal wonders. More than 4 million people travel here each year, making it a global destination that fuels a regional economy worth over $500 million annually. The park's geothermal features support rare microbes found nowhere else, while its forests and rivers provide a home for bison, wolves, and grizzlies. Yellowstone's protected landscape has become a living laboratory for scientists and a sanctuary for wildlife, setting a standard for conservation that inspired national parks around the world. Its presence on the map is more than a point of pride for Wyoming. It's a force that shapes economies, ecosystems, and imaginations across the globe. Snowmelt high in Wyoming's mountains gives rise to rivers that reach far beyond state lines. The Green River begins in the Wind River Range and soon becomes a lifeline for the Colorado River system, carrying water south through Utah and into the parched fields and cities of the Southwest. Every drop that leaves Wyoming's headwaters is already spoken for, governed by compacts like the 1922 Colorado River Agreement, now under fierce renegotiation as drought strains the system. The North Platte River, born on the snowy slopes near Casper, flows east to irrigate the farms of Nebraska, while the Snake and Yellowstone rivers wind toward the Pacific, feeding Idaho's crops and Montana's towns. Decisions made upstream about storage, diversion, and conservation shape who gets water hundreds of miles away. In dry years, the timing and volume of Wyoming's snowpack can determine whether downstream reservoirs fill or shrink, whether crops survive or fail. The state's position at the top of these river systems makes it a silent player in the fortunes of millions, from ranchers on the plains to city dwellers in Los Angeles and Phoenix. Elk gather in herds that can number over 20,000, moving each spring and fall along routes their ancestors have followed for centuries. Pronghorn antelope, the fastest land animals in North America, travel a federally recognized migration corridor stretching more than 100 miles from Grand Teton National Park to winter ranges near Pinedale. This is the only migration corridor for pronghorn in the United States with formal federal protection, and scientists track their journeys using GPS collars, revealing a living highway that crosses ranches, highways, and oil fields. Wolves and grizzlies, once nearly gone from the region, now roam vast tracts of public land, their populations rebounding thanks to decades of conservation work. These intact habitats support more than just iconic species. They form one of the last strongholds for large mammals in the lower 48 states. The integrity of these corridors means that animals can move freely between summer and winter grounds, maintaining genetic diversity and healthy populations. What happens in these wild stretches of Wyoming echoes across the West, shaping the future of wildlife far beyond state lines. The greater Yellowstone ecosystem stretches across 22 million acres, weaving together lands in Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. This vast network includes not just Yellowstone and Grand Teton national parks, but also national forests, wildlife refuges, and private ranches, forming one of the largest intact temperate ecosystems left on the planet. Its boundaries ignore state lines and property fences, creating a living mosaic where rivers, forests, and grasslands connect in ways that few places on Earth still allow. Here, the health of the land depends on cooperation between 3 states, dozens of federal agencies, tribal nations, and hundreds of landowners. Every decision, whether about grazing, road building, or wildfire management, carries consequences that ripple across the entire region. The sheer scale of this ecosystem means that it supports not only iconic species, but also the complex cycles of water, nutrients, and migration that keep the landscape resilient. In a world where most wild places have been carved into fragments, the Greater Yellowstone stands out as a rare example of landscape-scale conservation, where the stakes are measured not just in acres, but in the future of an entire region. Freight trucks and trains crossing Wyoming do not just deliver goods to local towns, they keep the country connected from coast to coast. Interstate 80 slices through the state for over 400 miles, carrying everything from groceries and electronics to auto parts and medical supplies. When a winter storm rolls in, the entire route can grind to a halt. In February 1999, a blizzard shut down nearly the full length of Interstate 80, leaving more than 3,000 truck drivers stranded and cargo delayed for days. The cost of closing this single corridor can top $1 million per hour, as shipments back up on both sides and store shelves in distant cities start to empty. Union Pacific's rail lines, running parallel to the highway, face the same risk. When snow, wind, or derailments close the tracks, coal, grain, and consumer goods cannot move. These choke points reveal just how much of America's daily life depends on a stretch of highway and rail across Wyoming, where a single storm can ripple through the nation's supply chain. Cattle outnumber people in Wyoming by more than 2 to 1. Each year, around 1.2 million head of cattle graze here, joined by hundreds of thousands of sheep. Most of these animals spend their lives on vast stretches of public land, thanks to federal grazing allotments managed by the Bureau of Land Management. These open ranges supply millions of animal unit months that keep herds fed and ranches running. The beef and lamb that start on Wyoming grasslands don't stay local for long. They travel through meat packers and distributors, eventually landing on dinner plates from Seattle to Atlanta. When drought hits Wyoming, the effects ripple outward. Ranchers are forced to reduce herd sizes and national beef prices can climb. Every steak or lamb chop served across the country carries a trace of Wyoming's high plains. It is proof that what happens on these pastures shapes the food supply for millions. Deep beneath the surface of southwestern Wyoming lies a mineral deposit with an impact that stretches into homes, factories, and laboratories across the country. The Green River Basin holds the world's largest known reserve of trona, a mineral that quietly powers modern life. Each year, Wyoming pulls more than 17 million tons of trona from these underground layers, supplying over 90% of America's needs. What happens to all that rock? Most of it is refined into soda ash, a key ingredient in making glass, detergents, and chemicals. The windows in skyscrapers, the bottles on grocery shelves, and the soap in kitchen sinks all start with Wyoming trona. About half of the soda ash made here ends up in glass manufacturing, while 1/4 goes into industrial chemicals and cleaning products. Even exports rely on these Wyoming mines, with nearly 1/5 of production shipped overseas. If supply falters in the Green River Basin, ripple effects reach everything from construction projects to household chores. It reminds the world that this quiet corner of Wyoming holds a mineral monopoly few realize. Wyoming sends just 2 senators to Washington, the same number as California or Texas. But with a population of about 576,000, each Wyoming resident holds a level of Senate influence unmatched anywhere else in the country. On a per-person basis, a vote from Wyoming carries about 68 times more weight in the Senate than a vote from California. This math turns a small state into a political heavyweight, especially when national policies are on the line. Senators from Wyoming have steered key committees that decide the fate of energy, land, and environmental laws. These are areas where the state has deep interests. When debates flare over public land use or resource development, Wyoming's votes can tip the balance. In a chamber where every seat counts, the voices from Cheyenne and Casper echo through decisions that affect millions far beyond the state's borders. Nearly half of Wyoming's land falls under federal management, a proportion matched by few other states. The Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service oversee millions of acres here, using Wyoming as a testing ground for new rules and policy experiments. When federal agencies test grazing reforms or energy permitting changes, they often do it first on these high plains. In 2015, the Bureau of Land Management's Wyoming office finalized a fracking regulation that later became the national model, shaping how oil and gas projects are permitted across the country. Disputes over grazing allotments, wildlife corridors, and mineral rights in Wyoming have set legal precedents that ripple through federal land policy from Nevada to Alaska. The state's vast public lands make it a place where the consequences of new regulations are felt quickly, and where local reactions can influence national debates. Decisions made in a Bureau of Land Management field office in Rock Springs or Casper can end up guiding how nearly 250 million acres of public lands are managed nationwide. Rodeo banners wave above packed grandstands as Cheyenne Frontier Days draws more than 250,000 visitors each summer, a tradition that has lasted since 1897. Here, the cowboy is not just a local figure. He is a symbol woven into the national imagination. The open range, the grit of ranch hands, and the freedom of public lands have shaped how Americans picture the West. Wyoming's landscapes and stories have fueled Western novels, Hollywood films, and country songs, keeping the frontier spirit alive far beyond state lines. This is a place where the code of the open range still matters, where the idea of wide-open possibility continues to shape how the nation sees itself. In December 1869, Wyoming's territorial legislature passed a law that changed American history, granting women the right to vote and hold public office, more than half a century before the 19th Amendment made it national law. The decision wasn't just symbolic. Esther Hobart Morris, a justice of the peace in South Pass City, became one of the first women in the country to hold judicial office the very next year. By the time Wyoming entered the Union in 1890, it refused to join unless women's suffrage stayed in place, earning its nickname as the Equality State. That legacy deepened in 1925 when Nellie Taylor Ross was sworn in as the nation's first female governor, another first that echoed far beyond state lines. Wyoming's early commitment to women's rights set a standard that would inspire the rest of the country. F.E. Warren Air Force Base sits on the edge of Cheyenne, but its influence stretches across the plains. Hidden beneath the grasslands are 150 Minuteman III missile silos, part of the U.S. nuclear deterrent that has shaped global security for decades. The base operates one of the nation's 3 intercontinental ballistic missile fields, with launch facilities spread across southeastern Wyoming, western Nebraska, and northern Colorado. Surrounding these silos, Wyoming's wide-open airspace becomes a training ground for military pilots. The state's low population and open terrain provide rare corridors where bombers, tankers, and transport planes can practice maneuvers without risking crowded skies. Defense planners rely on these routes for readiness, logistics, and national security exercises. In a world where threats can shift overnight, the geography of Wyoming remains a quiet backbone for America's defense strategy. Its fields and skies are woven into the calculations that keep the country safe. In the summer of 1988, wildfires swept through Yellowstone, burning 800,000 acres and sending smoke as far as the Midwest. That season forced a national reckoning with how fire shapes the land, and it changed federal wildfire policy for good. Today, Wyoming is still at the front lines of climate extremes. The average fire season here is now about 60 days longer than it was in the 1980s, with blazes starting earlier and burning hotter. Drought has become more frequent and severe, shrinking snowpacks that feed rivers across the West. In some years, the state's mountain snow melts weeks ahead of schedule, leaving reservoirs low and fields parched by midsummer. These patterns do not stop at Wyoming's borders. They are early warnings for what the rest of the region may face. The decisions made here about fire management, water conservation, and land use are watched closely nationwide, as states look for ways to adapt to a changing climate. Wyoming's challenges are a glimpse of the future, and how it responds will help shape the path forward for the entire American West. Across all 15 entries, one truth emerges. Wyoming's outsized influence comes from what it provides, not just where it sits on the map. Energy, water, food, and policy ripple from here to every corner of America. The pattern is clear. Wyoming isn't just a backdrop, it is a keystone state. Our daily lives depend on its hidden strengths. What surprised you most? Let us know in the comments below.